Welcome to Your Story Isn't Over, a podcast about hope in Jesus. Here's our host, pastor and author, Kyle Dunn.
All right, welcome to the podcast, Jonathan Crouch. So glad to have you here, man. Thanks for doing this.
What's up? Glad to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about you. We'll jump in here, a little bit of an introduction. Born in 1990 in Memphis.
Yep. What
do you love about Memphis?
Oh man, Memphis has just been home, and Memphis has a really cool kind of vibe to it. It's a large city, but we always tell people that you're only 2 or 3 people away from pretty much knowing everybody, and it usually rings pretty true. And Memphis has a lot of soul, a lot of character, and it's just it's got its issues, but it's a pretty cool place to live.
Yeah,
overall,
nice. And you love your Grizzlies.
I do love my Grizzlies.
Became a Christian when you were 6. Tell me how that came about.
Yeah, so grew up in the church, really, going to church, and my family growing up took a lot of vacations up to the Great Smoky Mountains, and so it would be the entire family. It would be us, my grandparents, aunts and uncles, all the cousins, and we would go to a campground and we would camp, either tents or campers. And one year, there was a group of probably college, high school students who they were doing a VBS in the campground. And so every morning they would round up the kids in the campground to come do this VBS, and they would tell us about Jesus. We would sing songs, we'd do crafts, all that stuff. And then I remember one day, this guy named Scott, he was talking to me about Jesus, and I just felt like God was drawing me to him. And at 6 years old, you don't know a whole lot. You just know that you're a sinner and that Jesus loves you.
Right.
And I was like, okay, yes, I'm a sinner. Jesus loves me. He wants me to have forgiveness of my sins and live with him. And so that's when God saved me. That's when I gave my life to Christ and was baptized shortly after that. So
cool. Yeah. So your family was like in the church groove before the camping trip and all that. You just happened to meet Jesus at a campsite with a VBS.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we were in church back when you were in church most days out of the week, and my mom and dad both taught in youth group there. They led Sunday schools. Dad was a deacon, so heavily involved in our church.
So you got baptized when you got back home?
Yep, got baptized back home. We were living in Warner Robins, Georgia at the time, and Any
chance you remember the name of like that group or the church that was doing the VBS? Did you ever circle back and find any of those people?
Yeah, not at all. I tried. I mean, this is 1996, and I mean, I just remember the guy's name. His name was Scott.
There's no internet footprint from 96 probably on VBSs in the mountains going on, but you should make up a cool story. That's what should happen.
I know. I could probably post that on Facebook or something, because I remember the campground. It's called Happy Trails Campground in, I want to say it was in Cherokee, North Carolina, South Carolina, one of those, something like that.
All right, so I think we've just discovered the topic for your own podcast, The Search for Scott.
Yes.
Put that on Facebook. You got so many details. Can you imagine how cool that would be if somebody knew somebody who knew somebody, and like, come on.
That would actually be really awesome. I might have to do that when I get back. Who knows what could happen.
Do a little research. The podcast is a little extra, but that'd be amazing to get to reconnect with somebody and tell them about how you're doing ministry, and probably have done your own VBS in different places and all that kind of stuff. So that's awesome. Yep. I love that. Graduated from Union University with a degree in intercultural studies.
Yes.
Jonathan, what in the world is intercultural studies?
That's a good question. I don't fully know. So I went into Union as a biblical studies major, and I did that my first year. I took all your typical just gen ed classes, but also started getting into some of the more biblical studies classes, Greek, New Testament, hermeneutics, all that kind of stuff. And after that year, I was like, you know what? I know I'm going to seminary after this. I was like, it's probably wise to get another degree. And I looked around at different things, and nothing was really interesting. psychology. I thought, oh, that might be cool, counseling and all that. And I was looking at like what it would take to do that. I'm like, and if I switch now, like there's a really good chance that I might not graduate on time. And so I found intercultural studies, which was a comprehensive major. So there was no minor required.
Okay.
You would have finished it, would have kept me on track. And it seemed really cool. One of my sort of thoughts even going in was possibly going towards missions.
Yeah.
And with intercultural studies, it's all about cross-cultural communication, relating to people who have different backgrounds from different places, and people who major in that, usually they end up working in either government, some NGOs in different places, throughout the world. For me, I had an emphasis in teaching English as a second language.
Cool.
I've always loved languages and doing that. And so I was like, oh, this seems cool. And I feel like it could have some practical application going forward. But that's how I ended up there.
So I could definitely see that intersecting with a potential move toward missions, knowing how to understand a culture, appreciate a culture, to move into a culture with honor and all those kind of things. And that could have been, a cool preparation for that. And do you remember any of the specific classes that were just in the major and kind of what they were about? I know it's been a minute.
Man, yeah, it has. I don't remember if it was a specific class, but one of the emphasis in kind of this major is this idea of cross-cultural communication and creating this third space. And that's not just for people who come from different countries. That's people who come from different worldviews, from different backgrounds. I mean, even just here in the U.S., we have so many people who live differently. I mean, even within... You live near or in any major city, and you have the nations there, and I think that has a lot of crossover with even just evangelism and preaching and teaching. If you want to take what's this timeless truth that's in Scripture from thousands of years ago, when you want to bring it now into a context that's able to be understood by people in Murfreesboro or in some other part of the U.S. or in another country, and creating this third space where there can be understanding and where you're contextualizing this in a way that it's actually meaningful and can result in some good communication and some change.
Nice. I love that. After Union, you earned a Master of Divinity from Mid-America Seminary. And then, was it after seminary that you and Christine got married?
Yeah, it was after seminary. It was several years after seminary.
How many years have you and Christine been married?
We've been married for 4 years, just over 4 years. Just celebrated 4 years a few months ago.
Awesome. Congrats, man. We're going to talk a little bit more about how Christine came to be your bride a little bit later. But now you are living in Murfreesboro and serving People of Hope Church as our pastor of students and church development. And man, we're so thrilled to have you here on our team and in our church family. And glad you're here. Thanks for hanging out with us today for a conversation.
Yeah, I'd love to be here.
Well, tell me a little bit about how you were born in Memphis, but your childhood was kind of in Georgia, right?
Yeah. So born in Memphis, lived there, kind of in the Memphis area for the first few years of life. And then my dad was working with FedEx, and he got transferred, looking for kind of something a little bit better job opportunity within FedEx. And the only opportunity really was in Warner Robins, Georgia, which is a couple hours south of Atlanta. So when I was about 4, I would say, we moved there and lived there up until 2000, where we moved back to the Memphis area and have kind of was there since until moving Indiana and then here. But yeah, a lot of my early childhood was spent in Georgia.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your dad. I know it's a significant part of the Georgia story and your whole life story, but talk to us about your dad's story.
Yeah, for sure. So my dad was, an incredible man of God from what I remember. He passed away when I was 10 years old, so that would have made him 35, I believe. And what I remember about him was just a love for people, a love especially for for middle school and high school and college age students. Like I mentioned earlier, he served in the church as a deacon in the church, and he was just someone who loved to laugh and loved to goof off. I remember stories that my mom tells and that my aunts and uncles and grandparents would tell about him, of just always just being a jokester. He was born on Halloween, so I think he's kind of living up to his birthday of just always wanting to pull some kind of prank, something like that. But yeah, like I said, my dad died when I was 10 years old. He was diagnosed with cancer, a pretty rare form of cancer, and we immediately were like, okay, we gotta figure out what are our next steps. And living near Atlanta, we went to Atlanta first. And the doctors looked at him, and they're like, "This is too far. Like we can't do anything." They essentially sent him home, said, "You got about 2 months to live."
Wow,
which was, I mean, devastating. It came out of nowhere, and so we didn't give up. We kept looking around. We got referred to a doctor, an oncologist, out in California, in Los Angeles. So we flew out to Los Angeles, met with this oncologist. This oncologist said, "You have hope." He's like, "But I'm not the doctor for you." So he referred us to a doctor up in New York City. And so we went there, and we traveled between New York City and Georgia for about 18 months, at times living up there for several months at a time.
Wow.
And yeah, he was going there for treatments, for chemo, for surgeries, for all of that. And sadly, he lost his battle with cancer in August of 2000.
I'm so sorry. What an incredibly jarring experience in your young life. Were your mom and dad, including you and your brother, with the details of what was going on and the diagnosis and the seriousness of it?
Yeah, for me, I knew some of it. My brother was really young. He was only 4 and 5 at the time, so he didn't really know it. And I knew very limited. I knew my dad was sick. I knew, kind of what cancer was. But she and he would keep me pretty informed of kind of what was happening. And like I said, we would stay up there at times, and I would see him, and there were times when he would be, really weak, but there's also times when he would be strong, and he would be dad again. And we would go to Central Park, and we would go to all the touristy stuff that you do in New York, kind of between some of his treatments. So,
the experience of going to the doctor the first time and getting the diagnosis, I think you said 2 months, but he ended up having some grace for 18.
Yeah, 18.
Which is a small blessing to get some extra time there with your dad. Do you have memories of that relationship and the opportunity to kind of enjoy him, as a 10-year-old and all that? Do you have any memories that stand out from that season?
Yeah, for sure. Me and my dad were really close, and actually, all my family says that we look almost exactly alike.
Wow.
That we sound and talk and act a lot alike, some of our mannerisms and all that. But the things I just remember about my dad is, my dad was a big NASCAR fan, and so we had these little kind of like Hot Wheels cars that we would collect, and we had this case that we would put them in that had little slots. I think was really designed for fishing lures.
Sure.
But they were the perfect size for one of those little Hot Wheels cars. And so anytime there was a NASCAR race on, we would get those cars out, and we would just look at them. He'd tell me about them. We would trade cars as well, which is kind of funny because he bought the cars for me, so he's just trading himself. But I remember stuff like that. I remember, like I said, we would go up to the mountains a lot and just being up there, and we would go on hikes. And I remember Dad taught me how to swim. Actually, right as he was starting to get sick, I think we took a kind of a last trip up there. I didn't really realize it was a last trip at the time, but I remember that. And it was actually that year that he taught me how to swim. Also, I could get this little toy Indian gun. But there's just so many fond memories.
That's cool.
Of him.
That's cool. Were you able to hold on to some keepsakes or memory things that belong to your dad that you kind of keep as treasures?
Yeah, there's one actually, and it's here. You can not see it, but it's on my keychain, and it's a leather little keychain that has a C on it that was etched in. And my dad actually made this back when he was in high school, in his high school shop class.
Very cool.
Gosh, probably the 70s, 80s maybe. Yeah, probably late 70s, early 80s. And yeah, he made that something that he had with him all the time. He always carried, and it's something that I've kept, and it's probably one of my most prized possessions that I have.
Awesome.
So I've got it on my keys.
That's an everyday thing to see and grab and kind of stay connected with that memory and all that. That's really special. That's cool. I've seen your keys, a lot and haven't really paid attention to that. So that's cool. I'm glad that you have that piece. So there you are, 10 years old. The things you'd been praying for went a different direction. The worst came to be, and your dad passed. Talk about sort of what that kind of created in the family dynamic, and kind of what some of the next phases were for you right after that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that rocked our family. Dad was super young, had 2 young kids, a young wife. This, like I said, really came unexpectedly, and we were blessed with a year and a half that we were able to still have with him that we didn't think we would have. But that did change a lot of things for us. I mean, for my mom, she became a single mother of 2 young boys and had to very quickly step into a role of playing mom and dad. For me, my little brother wasn't able to understand everything as being 5 years old. But for me, I knew exactly what was happening. That was really devastating for a long time. And there was a point where I just shut down.
Wow.
I just shut off. I didn't really want to talk to anybody. I just kind of retreated into myself, and eventually was able to kind of move forward and move past and process some of that grief. But that was, as you could imagine, for a 10-year-old boy who loves his dad, was just completely devastating.
Yeah.
And so one of my dad's wishes for us right before he passed was that we would move back up to be closer to his family, which lived in the Memphis area. And so we did that. After he passed away, we moved up to Tennessee and lived with my grandparents for a little while until we could kind of get our own place and kind of get our own footing, and ended up moving to Olive Branch, Mississippi, just outside of Memphis. But even during that, just saw God's faithfulness to my family. And I think what it really did was it strengthened us, and it caused us to have this incredible reliance and dependence on the grace and the strength and the peace of God.
Wow.
Because that's the only explanation that I can have for really how we got through that time. And also just the love of the church. Going back to when we were in Georgia, and we had people from not just our church, but other churches who were just caring for us. So people found out, that Dad was sick, and we didn't have a lot of money at the time. We were going back and forth to New York, and they bought our entire family Christmas gifts and all this stuff. And then as my dad was kind of nearing the end, our church literally came out to our house and physically circled our house in prayer.
Whoa.
And yeah, it was incredible. And they were just so good, so kind, so loving to us during that time. And when we were not close to family, they were our family, and they just wrapped us up in love. And then moving up to the Memphis area, got plugged into another church the same way. I mean, God just provided in so many ways. For me, as not having a dad, not having that male role model,
right?
Man, God put men in the church to just come in and step in the gap and love me. And some were high school students. I remember these 2 high school students, and then Michael and David, and they would take me and my brother to Chuck E. Cheese. And I was like, these juniors in high school who probably had a lot other better things to do than take two kids to Chuck E. Cheese. Man, they did that, and they were just so caring. And I had youth pastors who poured into me, and the dads of some of my good friends who just poured into me and my brother, and people who just loved my family and cared for us. And it was really just amazing to see that even through the hardship that God provides, and He's faithful, and He provides just goodness and grace and His church to take care of you.
Yeah. I love that you're sharing some of these stories that at the time when you were 10 and grief was all you could see and feel, it was probably hard to sort of put it in perspective, or maybe even to words, to say, oh, this church is stepping up. This is the presence of God coming around us, or these people are reaching out and caring for us, or all this is the presence of God. But when you look back at it in hindsight, you see that all through the darkest season, God was right there with you.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. And you're right. When you're in it, when you're in the mess and the darkness and the hardship, like, you don't see it. You're survival. You're just trying to not. Yeah. You're just trying to not drown. And it's a looking back years later where you're like, man, like God was good. Like that situation was terrible. Yeah. But God was good. Yeah. Through it all.
How long after your dad passed was it before you guys moved to Memphis or to Mississippi?
Yeah, I would say it was just within maybe a month or two. It seemed, that was so long ago, but it seemed pretty quickly. Like we didn't stay there very long. We just didn't have family. We didn't have anybody there outside of our, friends in church.
That's a lot of life change for a 10-year-old in a couple of months. That's a whole lot going on there. Did that have an impact on how you and your mom and your brother functioned together?
Yeah, I would say that, me and Mom are really close. Like, she's probably been one of the most significant spiritual leaders in my life, and showing me like what it means to follow Jesus and love Him. And I think that she did it, and she would probably say the same thing, was like, when you get hit in the mouth and like you get the bottom falls out under you, you've got nowhere else to turn but to God. And she was like, I know that if I'm going to make it through, like, I've got to lean in more to God. And she did that, and she encouraged us to do that as well. So for that, she was really significant. But even that just drew us close, because we were all we had. And we were like, we knew, like, we've got to rely on each other. We got to take care of each other. We've got to be there for each other to make it through.
Do you have any early memories of that move to Mississippi and family in Memphis and that kind of thing, and getting involved in church? So I'm guessing at this time you're 10, 11, you're moving into, close to middle school. Yeah. At that point, do you have any memories of how that was to transition in?
Yeah. So I remember when we finally kind of got our own place in Mississippi, and we were looking around at different churches. If you've ever done a church search is incredibly difficult, because you want to find the right mix, the right people. Everything's got to kind of come together, and sometimes that can take a really long time. But I remember this one church we found that we ended up staying at for a long time. I mean, I think we visited like maybe the third or fourth week when we had actually finally moved, and that first time we were like, this is it, this is home. And Mom was like, "Oh, we need to wait. We need to wait a little bit and try out a different church." And we went to one other place. We were like, nothing wrong with that church, but we want to go back. Like, that was home. And that second time that we went, we joined. The other church was Longview Heights in Olive Branch, and that was a place where we stayed until I graduated high school and went to college. And like I said, pivotal in my development, pivotal in just our relationships. I mean, I would say the vast majority of my friends that I had growing up, and even many to this day, family friends, like, came from that church, and the pastors that were there who cared for me and showed me what it meant to be a follower of Christ, and helped me to study the Bible and to have a love for God, a love for His Word, a love for missions and evangelism, and that's where like through their mentorship and through their guidance, I was like, yeah, God is actually calling me to do this same thing and to give my life and to
it's cool.
To be a pastor.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to overstate it, and these are my words, not yours, but I can imagine as a 10-year-old who lost somebody he treasured and loved and looked up to and then moved very quickly, there's a little bit of a sense of kind of being in free fall, and here this church, kind of caught you a little bit and really helped you from going under, like you were talking about a little while ago.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. Yeah, we were in free fall and they caught us.
That's
and
cool.
They held us up and they held us close.
So big shout out to your mom. Way to go, Mom. Remind me of your mom's first name.
Way to go, Vera.
Way to go, Vera. Keeping your family in church, not because you were trying to be religious or because you thought that was what you had to do to keep God happy, but because you knew that was the best support, that was the best community, the best place to be for your, free-falling family as you're trying to pick up some pieces and start a new chapter and all that kind of stuff. But that's amazing. There's a lot of people who go through dark days and twists and turns in their lives and really hard chapters in their story, and they withdraw. They don't lean into the community and they kind of pull back from church a little bit. But way to go, Vera, in keeping you guys where you really needed to be. Yeah,
my mom is a strong woman, and like I said, she's one of the most influential people in my life.
Nice. Well, dude, let's fast forward just a little bit. One of the other blessings in your life, one of the other big evidences of God's kindness and favor in your world is the lovely Christine, your very kind and nice wife that you're married to for 4 years.
Yep.
Tell us about how you and Christine found each other and how that relationship developed.
Yeah, so me and Christine, so I got to back up a little bit. I was at a church serving there super part-time, working another job, going to school in seminary. And it was at the point where like, well, I feel like it's just time to kind of transition and make a change. And I remember this one Sunday that we was after church and family wanted to go out to eat lunch, and I really wanted Mexican, and no one else wanted Mexican. I was really upset because I love Mexican food, but no one wanted that, and so I gave in. I was like, okay, fine, we'll do something else. We went to this pizza place in town, and I met a guy who was at another church, and he was a friend, and I was just kind of telling him what was going on, and so I was like, I'm really kind of considering looking for something else, kind of transition to another church. Felt like it's time just to take some more steps to something a little more full-time than what I was. And he was like, hey, I actually have a friend at another church who they're right now looking for an interim youth pastor. And I was like, oh, great. And he's like, yeah, I'll introduce you. And so he did. He hooked us up. I interviewed for this interim youth pastor job at this church in town or one town over. And I got the job, and that's where I ended up, and that's where I ended up meeting Christine. Met her in a young adults group that was meeting then, and at that time, Christine wanted nothing to do with me. Like she wanted nothing. To be fair, is what she says, anyways. I think to make me feel better, she wanted nothing to do with any guy.
Okay.
So, but yeah, she was like, yeah, Jonathan, you're nice, but like. No. And so it was really about 2 years of just really pursuing her and being around her and, kind of borderline stalking, but always just like making sure that I was there. And of course, you don't never want to go to a group to find somebody, but I was like, but she's a pretty good second reason to go to this group. So, man, we were there. And I just would see her and the way that she would interact with people.
Right.
And she was always so kind. She was always just bubbly and had a smile on her face. And I was like, when I would listen to her talk about God and about the Word, I was like, man, there is a depth to this woman. I was like, and I really want to get to know her more.
Yeah.
And she may not know it, but I was like, I'm pretty sure we're going to get married. She just needs to figure that out. And so, like I said, it went on for about 2 years.
Okay.
Of us just kind of talking.
So no dates
being
yet.
Friends. No dates yet.
Yeah.
There was a guy in our group who was kind of leading it, and he was playing matchmaker.
Okay.
With this for sure, and
Because that can go two ways. Sometimes that can blow up, and sometimes that can work.
yeah, for sure. But he and Christine were actually really good friends. They worked together. And I was starting to get pretty good friends with him and just knowing him. And he quickly was able to realize that I had feelings for Christine, and I liked her. And he kind of knew Christine's backstory and where she was at the time. So he was like, I'm going to get y'all together. And so he was very just kind of behind the scenes playing Cupid.
Did Christine know this was going on at this point?
She did not.
Okay.
She did not. It's
probably better.
Yeah. Later on, she was like catching hints. Like he would like kind of elbow her when I was around and like make hints like, oh, look how great Jonathan is and all this stuff. So it's, sometimes you got to have one of those guys who are putting your name out there. So, and during that time, we would go out on mainly it was group dates, and I guess it wouldn't really be called dates, but it ended up being like smaller groups of people, someone kind of the core in that group, and we would just hang out and just do things together. And then eventually, I was actually able to convince her to get dinner and get coffee a couple of times. And it was one of those things that was kind of an on again, off again. Like we would go on this date, but then it would be weeks, maybe even months before we went on another one. And we would talk here and then. And then it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure she likes me. I was like, and I know I really like her. So I finally kind of worked up the courage. Just to actually ask her out and to be honest, like, hey, this is how I feel. Like, I actually want to pursue something with you. And so it was after one of our groups one night, on a Thursday night, and it was at the end, and we were all walking out of the parking lot, and I pulled her aside, and I just laid it all out. I just laid it on my heart. I was like, Christine, I really like you. I was like, I think you like me. And I was just wondering, if you would like to actually pursue something more serious. And there's debate about what she said next. But
so what's her version first?
Her version is, I need to think about it.
Okay.
And my version is not too different, but it's just like, I need to pray about that.
Okay.
And so I'm like, at that point, I'm like, well, I can't really argue with that. If she wants to pray about it,
sure, she
needs to pray about it. And so I was like, okay, I get it. Like, I'm not going to pressure you. And I actually like, how about for this week, we just kind of pull back. Let's kind of not really talk. And I want to give you space to pray, think through whatever you need to. And so I did. That week, didn't text at all, nothing, zero communication.
Yeah.
So we get back on a Thursday night, which is when that young adults group meets, and she is avoiding, not talking to me.
Yikes.
Anything. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's happening? But I'm confident. I was like, I'm pretty sure she still likes me. I don't think I've scared her away. I was like, I know I still really like her. And so I just kind of let it go. And I don't say anything. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to give her more time. I knew Christine well enough at that point that I knew she likes to take her time with decisions. She likes to really think them through and not jump into anything too quickly. So I was like, okay, I'm not gonna pressure. Just gonna let her do her thing. So we're on week 2 now, and I sent a few texts here and there, and they're very just kind of like they're cordial, they're normal, they're typical nice Christine text, but that was very infrequent. Not at the pace that we were usually texting. So week 2 goes by. We talk a little bit more that night, but she doesn't bring anything up. I was going to wait for her to bring it up. I didn't want to be asked hey, have you thought about it? Have you prayed about it?
What's the answer?
Yeah. So didn't do that. I was going to let her kind of come to me with it. Nothing. And so at this point, I'm a little frustrated. I'm a little heartbroken and sad and confused. And so me and our mutual friend,
the matchmaker,
I'm talking. I was like, man, I don't get it. I'm pretty sure she likes me. I was like, and I know I like her. I was like, what's going on? I was like, you got to help me out. And he's like, I don't know what's going on with her. And so I'm sure at some point, he talked to Christine, but now now we're on 3 weeks going
Ooh.
and nothing. And so it's Thursday night, get there. It's still very much not a whole lot of talking between me and her during our young adults group. It gets to the end. I'm like, all right, I got to know something. And it also, unplanned, but just so happened to be Valentine's Day that year.
Just a little added pressure to the moment.
Pressure. So I was like, and I don't think I even realized it, at the time. And so it's after group, we're in the parking lot again. And I'm like, all right, Christine, like, I just need to know, like, yes or no. I was like,
right.
if it's no, like, that's okay. Like, I'll be really sad. But if it's no, if it's like not yet, I was like, I'll understand. I was like, but I really like you, and I think you really like me, and I really want to pursue something deeper than just the friendship that we have. And she said yes. She said, okay, yes, yeah, let's do this. Let's be boyfriend, girlfriend, go steady, whatever, whatever. That's such That's such an old phrase. I don't even remember the phrase that we use, but I think I just said, like, I really want to, like, make this something serious.
Yeah.
And
become Facebook official, right?
Become Facebook
in those
official.
days.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was Facebook official back during those days. And so, yeah, that's what happened. And, I tell all the time, like, you made us one of those cliche couples where we go out, where we, like, ask each other out on Valentine's Day. Like, if you just done it 3 weeks earlier and said yes. But no, so started, like, actually officially dating, and dated for 8 months.
Okay.
I proposed in October
Nice.
of that year, and we were married the following February.
Now, when you proposed, did she need 3 more weeks to think about it and pray about it at that point?
Okay, so I was terrified. I was like, I'm pretty sure she's the one. I'm pretty sure she's confident that I'm the one.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. I was pretty confident before, and it was 3 weeks. And so I was terrified she was going to say, let me think about it. Let me pray about it.
Right.
Whatever. But no, we were,
How did you propose?
So we went out to this kind of little restaurant. It wasn't super fancy. It was just kind of a normal kind of restaurant in a town just outside of Memphis. And it was a really cute, little quaint little town that on the square has this beautiful gazebo right in the middle. So had it all planned out.
Sweet.
Mom was going to help with flowers and candles and a little sign and all that kind of stuff. Had a photographer lined up to take pictures. And the night that we went, it was pouring down raining. It was like torrential downpour the whole time. But it was still plan was on. Like, her family knew it. They were going to be there. My brother and his wife at the time, they were coming up from Mississippi. They were going to be there for the proposal. And so we're at dinner, and I am freaking out. I've got this ring in my pocket that is just burning a hole. And I mean, Christine knew something was up. She knew I was acting. Yeah. I wasn't acting normal.
Right.
I was super quiet. I mean, I eat like fast and a lot. And I was like barely touching my food. And also I'm trying to like coordinate with everyone who's coming in. So I'm trying to like secretly text under the table, and there's horrible reception here. So like the texts aren't sending. So I end up going to the bathroom to like make a call. It's like, hey, we're about to do it. We're about to go out in about 15 minutes. We're getting the check. And again, torrential downpour. And so Christine, like, she doesn't want to get wet. She just wants to go to the car and go home. I was like, well, let's go to this gazebo. Like, it's really pretty. She doesn't want to go. I literally had to drag her. I'm like, please come look at this gazebo. You want
to go to the gazebo.
You want to go. And I feel like she knows like something's coming. So we get there. And right in the middle, I mean, there's candles everywhere. There's flowers there. And I bring her there. And she's faced the other way. And then I turn around and get down on one knee and propose. And just a brief pause. And she said yes. It was not 3 weeks, but I love it. She said yes. And like I said, we had a pretty quick engagement. Really just enough time to get everything planned. 4 months. And then we got married.
That's cool. Backing up before the proposal and before the 3 weeks delay when you were on radio silence to figure out what her answer is going to be. Way to go, man. Swinging for the fence in a parking lot conversation to sort of say, hey, I think there's something here, and I'd like to like make make a plan to investigate it, to discover it, and to really kind of look at it carefully and see what God might have for us here. So that's bold, that's courageous, that's awesome. I think a lot of people have cool stories of how parking lot conversations were meaningful in their relationships. I know Stacy and I had several of those along the way in our relationship before we got married. But I love that because you were not 19 or 20 or still in college. You had finished college and you were finishing your master's, and you were still waiting for how God was going to show you what the next chapter was for you in marriage. And but way to go to sort of say, hey, I'm serious about this. That's a big deal. And folks may or may not have met your wonderful wife yet, but Stacy and I have quickly learned in the couple of years y'all have been here, she is a godly young woman who is careful and thoughtful about what she does. And when she said she needed to think about it or pray about it, it's because she really wanted, God's guidance in all of it, which is a good thing. It's kind of what you want, but not what you want all at the same time.
Yes. I was like, because you have thought about it just slightly faster. So, but no, you're right. I mean, that was just, it was at a time in my life where I was like, it was a little bit later than what most. That's so weird. These
there's no most anymore.
It was
right
probably
anymore.
later than what I kind of had planned in my mind.
Sure.
But when I tell that story, and I told the story first about going to this pizza place, that was not the plan. And you never know. I always tell people, hey, you never know how God can use something as small as pizza, because it was being there. It was meeting that guy who knew the guy who was looking for somebody to come into their church, because I should have never been in that church. And even that church, Christine should have never been there. She was going to another church up in Memphis. And because her friend who had started a young adults group asked her to come along and help them get it started. She just happened to be there. I just happened to be there. And I wasn't at that church long. I was only in that church for a year. And I mean, God just worked it out. And there were also just wild. We lived in the same town. There were so many opportunities for us to have met before then. I went to a private school in town. She was at one point going to the church for that private school.
Okay.
Was at, like I said, we lived miles apart. We knew probably 95% of the same people. She actually worked with my mom for about 6 years prior.
Oh man.
She had worked with my mom for a little bit. So it's just all the ways that we could have met but didn't meet at that time. And it was just it was God's timing. It was him working it out, him using things like pizza to kind of bring us together at the right time, in the right place, when we were ready, when both of our hearts were ready for each other.
I love that you talk about it this way. It's another one of those moments when you look back in hindsight, you see God was doing something that you weren't aware of. God was on the move, behind the scenes. He had the two of you on a collision course, and you couldn't see it. And there had to be moments when you were kind of thinking, when, God? I've been waiting, God. And then you're like, is she the one, God? And then you're like, I sort of swung for the fence. What's the deal, God?
Yep.
And God's been faithful through all those seasons along the way.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So 4 years.
4 years.
What has being married taught you?
Ooh. Being married has taught me just how to serve someone else, really serve someone else. It's also taught me how selfish I can be at times, and didn't really realize that until you're living with another person. Yeah. And
that one hits close to home for a lot of people.
I'm like, man, I thought I was a pretty kind of had my stuff together. And I feel like I'm not a selfish person until you get married to another person. Yeah. And then you just realize it's just time and doing things and the dishes and chores around the house and cleaning and, just caring for another person. And so it's taught me that. And, I think that a lot of couples will say this, but marriage is so sanctifying. It shows you, and some of your flaws, it helps you grow into a better person, a better man. But also just man, how incredibly blessed that I am. Yeah. And to have someone like Christine, who she sees all of my flaws.
Right.
Like a lot of people, like they see kind of the A side of Jonathan.
Sure.
Most of the time. And, but she sees the ugly side. She sees me lose my temper. She sees me like get really frustrated and,
Yeah.
go through all the nasty stuff. And she still stays and she still loves me and she helps me through that. And so, and I guess just what marriage has taught me is just, it's taught me more about the grace of God and his goodness and his mercy and really what love is.
Yeah.
That love just kind of sees past all of that junk.
Yeah.
And I was like, you kind of messed up.
Yeah.
But I love you anyways and I care for you. And so it's just, before being married, like, I didn't know like what it really meant to love someone. You hear like people say that. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? And then being married, I was like, oh, that's it. It's not always the feelings. It's not always the mushy gushy, all that. Because there's times you're like, man, you're really difficult right now. I'm usually the difficult one. But just, seeing and how just that constant, that staying, that being with you, that like, hey, we're going to get through whatever it is together and none of us are going anywhere. Like we're here for the long haul. It's just really taught me what real love is.
Yeah. I like how you started out your story of what you're learning about serving somebody else. And, unconditional love in a marriage is when you see the weirdness in each other and you choose to love and choose to serve them. And it really is a ministry to the other person. And you kind of come to this place sometimes, and this was my own story, where I realized I'm being ministered to because I'm a mess. I'm a work in progress. I've got my own issues and all that. And she sees them. I can't hide them, and she's still here. And it's humbling to be loved like that, to know that there are days when I'm weak, when I'm not at my best, when I don't say the right thing, whatever, and I'm still loved and all that. And marriage is such a powerful thing that God made, for a lot of reasons, for each other, for the man and wife, but it's also this huge illustration, as Ephesians talks about, for Christ gave himself up for the church to love her, and that mutual giving yourself up for the other person. It's really powerful. It's really powerful. So
for sure.
That's respectable, man. For 4 years, you've already learned some pretty huge stuff.
Yeah. It's been kind of a crazy 4 years. Like there's a lot's happening in a short time for Christine and I.
Sure. So you mentioned with Christine in these 4 years, there's sort of been a lot that's gone on a little bit. Tell some stories a little bit about, getting married and then kind of fill in what happens after that.
Yeah, so getting married, right after we got married, like a week, we moved 500 miles north up to Indiana to work with a church plant up there that one of my really good friends had planted about a year before. And really, it even kind of goes back before that because I was serving at a church in Memphis. And something that had kind of been on my heart for several years at that point was church planting. And I was like, that's a someday thing. Like, don't know when that will happen, but, one day that'd be pretty awesome to plant a church. And like I said, my buddy had gone up there, and one dream we had always had before was to serve together. And he reached out to me. Oh gosh, I would probably say it was before Christine and I got engaged.
Okay.
He was like, hey, do you want to come up and help us plant this church? And I was like, oh man, I just got to this church I'm at now. I was like, I can't leave right now. And so kind of let it go for a few months. And then he reached out probably about 6 months later at the time. And so that first conversation was really I think right as Christine and I had just kind of started officially dating after the 2 years of pursuit and trying to convince her that I was an okay guy. And he reached out to me again. He was like, hey, I really want you to pray about coming up here. And so I did. I prayed about it for a while. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell Christine. No one knew. I think maybe my mom knew that I was even considering this. Because at that point, Christine and I were, pretty heavily dating at that point. Again, new at this church, hadn't been there very long. Had just bought a house like 3 months before, maybe not even 3 months. Yeah, probably just a few months before. And so I just kind of sat on it. He was like, well, why don't you come up and take a look and see what's going on? So drove up to Indiana, kind of saw what was going on, and you just really see God kind of moving in this small little church in this town outside of Indianapolis, and the gospel was being preached. I mean, you're seeing life change happen at this church. And I went back home. I was like, okay, God, if things are kind of lining up. I was like, it's church planning. You give me a passion for church planning. It's my best friend. We've always talked about wanting to kind of go into ministry together, lead a church together. But I've got two big issues. I was like, I've just got to this church. I'm just now dating this girl. And I've just bought this house. So I was like, you are going to have to work. You're going to have to open the door wide and work out everything for it to happen. And so this was before even Christine and I were engaged. And moving definitely in that direction. And I told her, hey, this is what's happening right now. This is what's going on. Been talking with my friend about this opportunity to work with this church plant in Indiana. So I was like, hey, I know you and I are still fairly new at this. I was like, hey, I love you. And I really want to spend the rest of my life with you. But this is really where I feel like God is leading me. And when I say me, if we end up, if we are meant to be together, it's going to be an us thing. Right. And so I just kind of let Christine kind of feel that out and get her thoughts on it. And she was actually surprisingly very quickly. She was like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, to her credit, she just accepted it, and having never been up there, not knowing this guy, not knowing hardly anything, and she said yes to it. And then I told my friend, I was like, okay. I was like, I don't know what the timeline will be just yet, but we did it, and I put my house on market. I mean, it sold within hours of being on the market. Was able to get out of it, without owing anything, and let the job know, at the same time.
And so some context here. So what month and year is it when you move up to Indiana?
Yeah, so by the time I finally move up, it was January. So Christine and I weren't even married yet at this point. So I moved up there, moved up all of our stuff. And because I wanted to kind of just go ahead and get there at the end of the year. I'd quit my job or resigned at my job in December. And it was just a really good transition. You ended there in that year. And then in January of 2020, moved up to Indiana. So I was living up there for about a month and a half, just kind of getting the apartment ready, getting stable, going ahead and just jumping in with the church and, doing wedding planning. Christine was holding down the fort, doing the bulk of that. And then came back in February, got married. We went on our honeymoon. We came back for a week just to kind of pack up her stuff, say some final goodbyes, and we loaded up a trailer. Well, no, that was actually in January, but we loaded up our car and moved up to Indiana, and we were there, and things were really good at the beginning. But as you know, 2020 kind of threw the world a big curveball.
So you got married in February.
Yep.
Of 2020, and she joined you literally just weeks before the world shut down.
Yes.
Wow. Talk about that.
Yeah, so that was just a wild time. I mean, there were a lot of good things in that as a newly married couple, we got to spend days on end with each other, which was actually kind of cool just to have that time. But you don't always get that. Just to be able to spend that much time with each other, to explore a new city, we went on hikes, we binged all kinds of shows and movies and all of that stuff. And so it was an interesting time in that aspect that we got really close. And I felt like we kind of maybe took a little bit of a jump start in our marriage as far as just being with each other, because it was just us. We didn't have family around. We didn't have anybody around. But on the other side of that, like, that was also really difficult. We didn't have family around. We couldn't be with any friends. And so I had a little bit of an advantage of already being up there for a little over a month. I got to build some of these relationships. The pastor and his wife and their family, I'd known them for like 20 years. And so I had that there, but Christine had nothing. And so that was probably the more difficult side of that, is just we just didn't have any relationships outside of me and her and the pastor and his family. And so there was a lot of loneliness there, because there were some travel restrictions of where you couldn't go during that time. And it was just, they were good, like anything in life. There were some really good things, cool things, fun things, but it was also just kind of tiring, and it was hard.
It's a little interesting too, because there was a silver lining in it, that you guys were stuck together right there at the beginning of your marriage, getting a little extra time together. But this thing was happening to all of us, right?
Yep.
So it wasn't just this happening to the two of you. It was like, okay, this is what we're doing now. Everybody is doing now. And so it turns a lot of things into upheaval and that kind of stuff. So talk a little bit more about the church role and the church experience there.
Yeah, so the church, it was a plant of a plant, so fairly new. By the time Christina and I got there, it had been going for probably just over a year, and it had already gone through kind of a transition, some leadership transition. And so it was kind of a sort of a fresh start when we got there. Had a really strong core group of people who, and they're some of the just most amazing just church members that I've ever met, who and loved us, welcomed us, loved the word. And so, like most churches, we went virtual for those first few months, and we were learning, like, oh, okay, Facebook Live or something, and streaming. It started out with like our cell phones, and then all that kind of craziness of trying to how do we meet through Zoom, and how do we still maintain some kind of semblance of community. And I guess about 3.5 months kind of after the initial shutdown, we started meeting again, and we met at a YMCA, and thankfully for that gave us plenty of space within their gym to spread apart, to meet safely, and because we were smaller, we were actually able to gather in person much sooner than some of the other larger churches were. And so we did that, but really kind of after COVID, and again, I think this is true for a lot of churches, a lot of organizations, things just weren't quite the same. And so we had lost several people who just decided to do other things. Some of that was that they didn't agree with the way that we handled the shutdown. As you know, that got really politicized really quickly. And there was no right answer. No matter what you did, you were going to make someone angry. And so some people left. But even at the same time, because we had an online presence, which we wouldn't have had the shutdown not happened, we actually gained some people. Some people started coming, and then we got back up to some pre-COVID numbers and actually continued to grow. We got up to a high fairly consistently for a couple months.
It's great. Of
about 60, 70, which for a church, you're a year and a half old at this point. You've gone through a global pandemic. You're like, okay, things are going well. And then I remember the day in this conversation, the lead pastor, my good friend, they had been up in Indiana, not just there for that church, but for the previous church plant. And it was hard. Church planting is really hard, as you're fully aware, and as any church planter is fully aware. It's hard. It's good, but it's hard. And they were just at the point, they had 4 young kids, had gone through some different leadership things at that church, and they were just kind of done. They were ready to kind of step out, and they felt like God was calling them out, calling them away, which was a huge shock to Christine and I. I mean, I'm just even now thinking back to that conversation in their kitchen, like just crying, because I mean, we had finally, like, things felt like they had stabilized and that they were good. I was like, okay, we're back. We're getting some momentum. We're going forward. We're like, again, they were really a huge part of the reason why we moved up there. And so, like, knowing that they're going to leave, we're like, okay, this is now going to be on us if we want to continue this.
So you moved up there in February of 2020. Mm-hmm. What month, year is this when this kitchen conversation happens?
Ooh, this was probably March of the following year.
Okay. Yeah. So you kind of had a year together under your belt and come through the sort of the most isolation of the pandemic and kind of rebounded a little bit and all that. And so talk a little bit more about the drive home for you and Christine after that kitchen conversation with that lead pastor.
Yeah, it was a pretty quiet drive. Like, it was strange because we had had that conversation, and that was, kind of midday, and they had actually invited us back over again for dinner that night, and I kind of wanted to go, but Christine was like, I've got to be home. And so we ended up just kind of staying home, and we almost kind of like just vegged out because that was so much to take. I mean, I think we binged The Office or Harry Potter or something like that. And
what were some of the emotions you were combating at that point?
Yeah, so for me was a little bit of, I don't think I knew the emotions I was facing at that time, because for me, my mind immediately went to, all right, we got to figure out what we do next. And I think I shut down a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, and I was just like, all right, we've got to figure out how we're going to save this church, what the transition is going to look like. We got to figure out, hey, do we actually want to stay? Because we came up there not to really lead that church. We came up there to help,
right? But
not to be, I didn't come up there to be the guy. He was the guy. I came up there to support. And so I know through that process, I didn't process my emotions really well until the end. For Christine was just kind of shut down. I was like, she was done. She didn't have the relationship that I had with him, so she was like, "Yep, this is terrible. Like, we got to go. We got to get out of here. It's not safe. We got to go back to Memphis, go back home." And even through that, and I guess when I had a couple of days to kind of figure things out, for me, it was a little more feeling a sense of hurt and betrayal. And so for me and my friends, and we thankfully have had conversations since then.
It's good.
The way that he kind of handled that of telling me, I was really hurt by, because him and his wife had known that they were thinking about leaving for probably 6, 7, 8 months. And, I understood in those initial conversations y'all are having that, like, y'all want to keep that between you. You don't know. But when you start to realize, like, hey, this is real, like, this is where we're kind of leaning, I felt like he owed it to me, that the guy who came up here, for him and his good friend to sort of say that. So when I found out some of this, and they had known this for a long time, I was really hurt, because I was like, man, I felt like you couldn't trust me. And then you've put us in a really hard spot. You put me and Christine in a hard spot of having to very quickly figure things out. And you've put this church and the people in a hard spot of, we don't have a lot of time to know what next steps are, because they were moving in May. So we found that out at the end of March, and they had already gotten a house back home.
Man.
They were moving. Like, May was the deadline. And so in this, man, we're trying to figure out, like, what's next? And there were just so many questions, so many just,
sure.
We didn't know. We really didn't know our next steps. And so for Christine, I know that she was just like, not just shell shocked, but like just didn't really. She was like, I don't know what to do. For me, like I said, I didn't process my emotions super well until the end. I was just no time to cry, no time to worry.
Right. There's stuff to do right now.
There's stuff to do, stuff to figure out. So I just very quickly, it was, man, full steam ahead, trying to save the church.
Man, so you leave home, you move up there, the world shuts down, the things kind of open back up again. It's a year later, and this guy who invited you to come up and help is now handing you the keys.
Yeah.
To this church plant that you never felt called to plant it. You never felt called to be the pastor of it. And now the story has taken a big turn. That's a huge, huge deal.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
For sure.
And I love, it just speaks to your character as a pastor and shepherd that, you know, yes, you cared deeply how it impacted you and your bride, but it also, you cared deeply about how it impacted God's people in this church and all of these amazing folks who'd stuck with you and through the pandemic and were doing that hard work of trying to get a church off the ground. And so that's a major, major curveball in the story. What kind of pastor and his family head out, talk about the next season for that church?
Yeah, so I kind of step in. I'm like, all right, we're going to lead this thing. Like, we feel like God has called us here. And I don't know, I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know for how long. And so it was me and Christine, and met with one of our elders and his wife. And we that church was planted through the SIN network, the North American Mission Board. So we had some of the SIN missionaries in the city kind of meeting with us, trying to figure out what to do, and the pastor of the other church, and just trying to figure out what next steps are. And we kind of agreed. We're like, all right, let's give this 6 months.
Okay.
Let's give this 6 months. Let's reevaluate. So I get in there. I'm starting to kind of dig through the business side of the church. And at this point, after they've left, we had several people just leave. Not because they were mad. They're just like, they had a really strong connection to the pastor.
Yep.
And they were like, we just feel like we just need to do something different. And had that happened, you're looking at giving, you're looking at finances, you're looking at the people that you have to just pull off the stuff that you're doing. And it was very quickly becoming evident that the business side of the church was a hot mess.
Yeah.
There was not a lot of good record keeping. There's not a lot of anything. And I mean, God just provides in incredible ways. And there was a banker in our church who was able to come in and make sense of all the numbers, because I am not a numbers guy.
Yeah.
I like to talk to people. I like words, numbers, not me.
Same.
So she was able to figure that out. And we were like, okay, here's the reality of where we're at. And it was very quickly becoming evident that this is probably going to be a replant situation where we scale back, we pull back, we figure out possibly a new location to meet at. We had gotten much smaller. But even in that, I mean, we just had incredible people who they still wanted to meet together. We were still worshiping every Sunday. We were still gathering. We were still serving in our city, still seeing life change. I mean, there was multiple testimonies of people in our church and coming out of just drug addiction and all this kind of stuff and finding hope in Jesus. The name of our church was Restoration, and it was really living up to that, of the restoration of all things. But there's, as you know, there is a business side to an organization, to the church as well. And so during these meetings with leadership within the church, within the denomination, my one elder, talking with him one day, and I was like, okay, we've got this plan. We'd formulated this plan. We'd prayed about it. We talked about it, got it all together. This is what we're going to do. We're going to kind of do this replant thing. We're going to negotiate some rent, or like I'm going to take a bit of a salary decrease. I was like, and we're going to make it. We're going to get there. And he had actually gotten a job offer in another state. And, he was not paid by the church. He wasn't working for the church. His family he was out of state as well. And so his family was all in that state where he got the job offer from. And when he told me that, and I remember I was in the car driving, and I was so excited. I was like, okay, yes, we've got the plan to go forward. And he told me that, and I was like, I've never felt anxiety,
Wow.
but I could literally feel my chest tightening up and being hard to breathe when he told me that. I was like, this is it. Like, this is it. Because I knew if we had him and his wife, we had a shot at making it. We had a shot at doing it. But when it was just me and Christine, I was like, we're alone, and we just can't do it. And so and that conversation, we're like, it's time to shut things down. I was like, it's sad, but I think it's time to shut things down. Well, we didn't say shut things down. I told Christine, I was like, we can't stay.
Yeah.
I was like, we want to stay. We want to give it a shot, but with everything that's going on, I don't have the energy. I just can't do it. And told that to the church, and they were very understanding, so gracious, so supportive. Because I was terrified. I was like, man, people they're gonna be mad. They're gonna feel that down. They're gonna feel hurt. And that was something I never wanted to do. I never wanted to hurt these just amazing people,
Right.
that God had blessed us with. And I was like, man, they're thinking this 30-something-year-old who like doesn't know anything. They're just hightailing it out of here. These Southern boys coming up to Indiana, leaving. And so we met with the church a few times to kind of figure out, like, okay, there's two options. Y'all can look for another pastor, or we dissolve.
Yeah.
And we shut things down, and no one really had any energy to look for another pastor. And that was a really hard time. It was sad because it's kind of the death of something. But I just remember some of the conversations with some of the people who, like, they were so thankful and grateful for the time that they had at Restoration. And they said, this is not like, yes, it's sad, but they said, this is not like devastating. Like, there's good things happen. I mean, amazing things happen. I mean, people literally found new life because of that church. But it was just, I think what made it so sad was, like, there was so much potential there. There was people who wanted to be there and just couldn't make it happen. And so in August of 21, we shut things down. We had our last gathering as Restoration Church. And we kind of closed doors.
So that's so much to carry, and I can't imagine all that was swirling inside of you as you're newly married, moving to a different place away from home, bringing your new bride with you. The world shuts down, rebounds. The guy who invited you there says, we're leaving. It's yours. And sounds like God gave you guys some good support through some of these denominational leaders and some good counsel and all that. So you weren't fully alone in all those decisions. But giving it a shot, and you're carrying all that load and figuring out the business side, but then also preaching on Sundays and trying to lead the people and shepherd the people well, finally to come to realizing, you know what, the next best thing is to dissolve this. And so I'm curious, was there in all of that heavy, crazy, can't believe this is happening experience, was there a darkest day for you? Was it the kitchen table conversation where the pastor's leaving? Was it the elder saying, hey, we've gotten this job offer somewhere else, so we're headed out? Or was it the first time you said the word dissolve, or was there another moment?
Yeah, man, all of those were really heavy, but I think the one moment where it hit me the hardest, and I just kind of cried a little bit, was like I said, we met at the YMCA there in town, and so we had a little storage closet. Well, when you dissolve a church, even as small as us, we had assets, we had supplies, we had all this kind of stuff, and kept everything in that closet. And so we ended up giving all of our stuff to our planting church that had planted us. And I remember after we kind of got all that stuff cleared out, we loaded it up. I just stood in that empty closet that I'd gone in so many times, to bring stuff out of, like, this is it. That felt final. Like that was hard. I was like, man, it's over. And I just felt like a dream that I'd had for a long time was kind of done. I felt a little bit of I think that's the moment when all the emotions finally came in, where I finally had time to just breathe and start processing. Man, the sadness came in, the grief, the feeling that I had let people down, the frustration with my friend who, again, dearly loved, but was really mad and really hurt and angry at. Yeah. The feeling that I had failed the church, that I had failed Christine, that I had failed God in some way, and I was a failure as a pastor. And even in that moment, wondering, like, God, have you actually called me to this?
Wow.
Because it's like, I can't see how this is a good thing that I felt so strongly you called us up here, and now this church is dead in, just a year, a little over a year of us being up here. And so that was hard. That was some hard moments of just like, not really knowing what the next steps were.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I can picture standing in that closet and all the stories and faces and people and things, and you're like, how in the world did we end up in this moment? And it's so much to carry, but dude, way to go being faithful and carrying it through and not bailing and really kind of shepherding those people so that they were cared for well. The dissolving of the church was not the death of the church. It was the best next step for that community, and being real about it and coming to that understanding had to be so difficult, but you were faithful in it, and you stayed in and modeled good shepherding, and you loved the people well. And I just know that down the road, you're going to be able to see how the Lord used that in forming you into an even better shepherd who understands grief and pain and loss and the stakes of church planning even more. But thanks for sharing all that. And what an incredible, tough season of your life. While you were going through that, was there any scripture passage that was meaningful to you that kind of kept giving you some hope to hang on?
Yeah, I think one passage that not just for that time, but that has really been foundational and pivotal and has given me hope, and through the death of my dad, through just all of life, has been Jeremiah 29:11, which I know is a favorite verse for a lot of people.
Well, it's a favorite for a reason.
Yeah.
That's good.
Which says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope." And the reason why I love that verse, and it often gets taken out of context a little bit, of like the guy just wants good things and nothing bad is ever going to happen, and that God wants you to be healthy and easy. But when you step back and you look at the full context of what Jeremiah is telling these exiles of Israel who are living in a foreign land, and they're done. They're at their wits' end. They are under this pagan regime, and God is saying, "Hey, even now, even in this darkness, even in this mess," and it was a mess of their own making. They're like, "I'm still going to." God's like, "Hey, I haven't left you.
Yeah.
I'm still going to be faithful to you. I'm gonna restore you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be kind to you. I'm going to be good to you. And I am working all things out for your eventual good." And God's like, "Hey, and I'm going to get glory from this. And you're going to look back one day and you're going to have an incredible story of how good God has been to you, that he's brought you through the wilderness. He's brought you out of exile and back into the land and the home that he has promised." So anytime I think of that verse, whether that was through the death of my dad, when going through the things in Indiana, man, I look at that as like, this really sucks. I didn't know the way to say it.
Yeah.
And it's hard and it's painful, but I'm trusting in God because I know who he is. And that even though, days are dark, and feeling like there's not a whole lot of hope, God, I know you're going to work all things out. You're going to work all things out, and you know the plans. Like this didn't. My dad's death didn't come as a surprise. Restoration shutting down didn't come as a surprise. I mean, it surprised us, but it didn't surprise you, and you're going to use it You're going to redeem it and make something good out of this really broken and bad time.
It's so crazy to even think about going through some of those terrible seasons without knowing Jesus and the hope that we have in him and the trust that we have. And I know that today there's somebody listening to this episode and is going to be encouraged to hold on and to hang on and to remember that their story isn't over. That verse in Jeremiah is a great reminder of God saying, keep hanging on. I'm up to stuff you can't see.
Yep.
I got plans. And you can't see all the calculations and the moves and the arrangements, but I'm always going to be faithful. And I'm so glad that was meaningful to you. And I'm also glad we get to be part of the next chapter of the story at People of Hope and in Murfreesboro and in our friendship. And I'm thankful for that. So out of some darkness and dissolving the church and an empty closet and figuring out what's next, talk about sort of that season of transition toward God opening a door with People of Hope.
Yeah, for sure. So that season of transition was weird. I had served in churches since college. Since a sophomore in college, I had some sort of paid staff position at a church since then. And now all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I've got no church. I've got no job. I had another part-time job, but that was definitely not making ends meet at the time. And we're like, okay, what do we do next? So Christine and I, we prayed about it. We got away for a few days just to we got to get out of the state and just be somewhere else, get out of the city. And we just started kind of looking of where God wanted us. We looked in Indiana. We're like, we're here. Like, okay, maybe Restoration was a church, but maybe Indiana is the place where he had us. And we just started kind of looking everywhere. And during that time, like, God was so good and faithful. He provided in so many ways. Like I said, though the church was not an official church anymore, the people who were there never stopped being the church to Christine and I. They had us over for dinner. They loved on us.
That's great.
And there were a couple couples who had no idea that we were struggling, financially, but like, they're like, hey, we haven't found a church yet. So we're like, we're just going to give you our tithes. I don't know how biblical that is, but like, we received it joyfully and gladly. And
God was taking care of you.
God was taking care of us. And, man, in so many ways. And they were so good to us. But, we started looking for we want to go to a church. And I will say that first Sunday after we shut down was maybe the most bizarre Sunday I've ever experienced. I was suddenly in a church that I'd never been to before, had no role, had no responsibilities, had no connection with. I couldn't even stay in the service. Like, I left a couple of times just to to almost breathe. But it got better after that. We found some churches that we were able to just kind of get connected with, and it was very quickly becoming apparent that Indiana was not the place for us to stay. And so we started really looking kind of closer to home, closer to where we had family. And so I went through the interview process with many different churches, and some were very quickly, nope, that's not it. Others got pretty far in the process, and, for whatever reason, it was like, whether it was on our end, on their end, we're like, no, we're probably not the ones. And so that process was pretty long, and it was starting to get pretty deflating because there were a couple ones that I was excited about, and they just went a different direction. And so that was saddening. And then I remember it was just before Thanksgiving of 21, I guess. Yeah, 2021.
Yeah.
I saw the listing for People of Hope on a church staffing site, and I was reading about it. And at this point, Christine and I had said, established churches, no new churches, no church plans for sure. And I was like, yep, you're right. We need some place that's like, we know is not going to fall apart, in a year from now. So I was looking, and I saw, People of Hope. It's in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I was like, oh, that's close to home. That's a cool name. And I was just kind of reading about it. I was like, oh, man, they seem like they have some really cool stuff going on. Love the vision, love the mission, love everything about it. I saw new church plan. I'm like, Nope. But I just kind of sat on it. I didn't tell Christine anything about it because I knew she would write it off right away.
Sure.
And so I sat on it for a few days, and I'm still sending out resumes. And even in that, like, you put on your resume, been out of church for like a year, and it's shut down like that. Kind of starts to raise some red flags for people. So I felt like I had to explain. I was like, this is what happened. And like trying to explain what happens in a paragraph is difficult.
And relive all that.
And relive all that. And, whenever you have interviews, like people want to know about it, which was challenging to rehash that. But yeah, getting back to People of Hope, I just kind of ignore it for a couple of days, and it just keeps coming back into my mind. And I was like, you know what? What's it going to hurt to send an email? And so I remember it was just a few days before Thanksgiving. I sent you that email, resume, cover letter, and I, explained it like this is what happened and all this kind of stuff, and not really expecting much of anything, especially around that time of year with the holidays rolling in. I didn't tell Christine anything. I didn't tell her that I had applied. And then I remember one day, it was, I think, the day that we were actually going to head back to see family.
Yeah.
For the Thanksgiving break, you sent me an email. And I remember reading that email and just crying because it was so compassionate, so loving, and just something like I felt like I hadn't had someone say, hey, I know where you've been, and I kind of know what you're going through. And so that's when I told Christine, I was like, okay, so Christine, I got something to tell you. There's this church that I've sent my resume to and I've applied to. And I was like, and it's a church plant. And she's like, nope, absolutely not. I was like, but wait, hold on. Let me explain where it's at. Like, they're not brand new. Like they're going on a few years. Like they're, they've got a good group of people. They're moving towards a building and all this stuff. Like there's some good things are happening here. I was like, and then also read this email that the pastor sent. And then so she reads it and like she's crying and we're both crying in the car. And she's like, okay. And then after that, the story, we start connecting via Zoom that following week and having just, incredible conversations and just the way that you and Stacy cared for us was just amazing. It was at that moment like what we needed, and you were just being a pastor to us and caring for us who were hurting. And so yeah, we have those conversations. Again, we're getting close to holidays, and I'm thinking, man, nothing's gonna happen for a while. But also us knowing in the back of our head, like our lease is up in January. Like we got to know where we're going, and we were really hoping not to move twice. We want to just make one move.
Sure.
And then you brought us in, and just an incredible time of hearing yours and Stacy's heart, hearing the heart for the church, seeing the church, meeting some of the people, and trying to be covert, which you can't be covert at People of Hope. Like you just get mobbed by people. So I'm like, okay, I got to have a story that's not a lie that I can tell people of who we are and why we're here. So I think we just used the phrase church planting friends, which was true. And so did that. And then, we had the Christmas break, had some time to think about it, pray about it. And it was just like, for me and Christine, we were like, yes. And it was so good to hear from you and Stacy and the leadership at People of Hope was yes. And then it felt like a whirlwind after that of like officially accepting and getting there like, oh man, we've got to move. Like our lease is up at the end of January. And so we come back down to Murfreesboro. We find a place. We're like, all right, man, this is great. Found an apartment. We get back. We're now, man, probably a week from having to move and get a call from the apartment that it fell through. We're like, we have no place to live. But even that, it was just a mad scramble that week, and we found a place. Almost got scammed a couple of times, but then we found the place we're at now, which was just, again, another gift of God.
Sure.
Which was even better than the place we were looking at before originally.
Yeah.
That we were just really saddened by that we didn't get. And so we moved, and now we're here.
Yeah. So, man, as much as I've heard you and Christine talk about how People of Hope is a blessing to you, in a new chapter of your life story. You guys are a blessing to us and some answered prayer, and we're really thankful to have you with us and on the team and helping us to build this new young church. We're so glad that you've come out of the darkness of that season in Indiana, the shock, the curveballs, the can't believe we're in this moment, dissolving, standing in an empty closet, and then that first Sunday when you're at a different church, and you're like, oh man. Tell me about some of those first Sundays being in the gathering at People of Hope, and how you connected some dots on God being faithful, that your story hadn't been over.
Ooh, wow. Yeah, I remember that first Sunday we were there. Gathering was over. We're leaving. We're actually heading to a community group with our new community group that we just met. And Christina and I sat in the car, and it was her words. She's like, "It's good that we're here." And that just felt like such a moment of just like, oh man, like feel like the kind of the dark times are finally over on this chapter. Like this chapter is closing and it's resolving, and good came out of it. And man, People of Hope just felt like home. Like it just immediately felt like home. It's one of the most loving communities that I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
People who genuinely care and who are just there for you. Because even here, like, we don't have family here. All of our family is much closer in Indiana, but still a few hours away. And our People of Hope family has really become our family. And yeah, those first few gatherings that we had were just so powerful, so moving, where it just felt right. And we're just experiencing, God's goodness. And I don't remember when the song was. It was definitely, I don't know if it was the very first gathering or one of the very first gatherings, but we sang one of those songs, sang the song Goodness of God, which has been pivotal for me, pivotal for Christine and I in our life. I mean, a song that I listen to probably a couple times a week. And like when we sang that song, I was like, yeah, God, you're good and you've been faithful and you've never left us. And it's just something that I've reminded myself and that I've told people all throughout life that, there is never a moment in your life where God will not be faithful. Yeah. And you may not always see it.
Yeah.
And things may look dark for a while. And there's going to be seasons and where you're in the valley and you're like, I don't see how this is ever going to end. But there's these little reminders along the way. And even back in Indiana, there are these reminders. And coming here, there are these reminders. Dealing with the death of my dad and just people coming in, there are these reminders that God is faithful and that he's good and he's running after us and chasing after us in his goodness and his love and his mercy. And yeah, it's just, it's indescribable.
Yeah.
When you feel that and you're like, you know what? We're going to make it through.
Yeah.
By the grace of God, we're going to make it through.
Thanks for sharing all that. When you're in a difficult season, it's hard to hold on. Mm-hmm. And you know the right answers, right? You know the verses and you've sung the song and it hits different. And then you get a little bit further in and God shows what he was up to. And you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
You were always at work. You were always planning to do this. And it's such an encouragement for people listening today to remember that God's infinitely creative. You had no idea that you guys would come to a place called Murfreesboro or People of Hope, but God did. Yep. You had no idea that you needed People of Hope and People of Hope needed you, and God did. And he's infinitely creative and endlessly faithful, and he's always at work. And I try to remind folks, faithful isn't just what God does, it's who he is. Yep. It's a part of his nature, and so he's always going to be faithful because that's who he is at his heart. Thanks for sharing all that, man.
Yeah.
Well, we have come to that point in the podcast where we get to do our dicey questions. If you're a first-time listener today, dicey questions is a fun way to kind of access some different questions that we have for our guests. So we have a couple of dice, in a little cup that gets shaken up. Oh yeah, there you go. And we'll roll the dice. There's, numbers up to 12 on the dice, and we got 12 questions. So we have no idea which question you're going to roll today. So go ahead, my friend, roll them out.
Little shake. 2.
2. All right. So according to the Dicey Questions list, here's question number 2. How does Jonathan Crouch define success?
Oh, wow. Man. I think now, and I think I'm still defining success a little bit because I still struggle with that. I've got to accomplish, I've got to produce, I've got to put out something that people say, oh man, look at what you did. You were great. And, I've had some things that probably on the outside you look at a little bit as maybe a failure in some ways. Failure may be a strong word, but maybe not up to where I would want them. But I think for me, success now is, have I been faithful to what I've been called to do? And have I done everything that I could do by my power? Have I relied on God? Have I been the best that I could be in whatever the situation is? And if I can lay my head down on the pillow at night, if I can look back and see, you know what? Yep, I was faithful. I worked hard. I did everything that I could have done. Then whatever the results are, whether they are seen as successful or not on the outside, I am growing more comfortable with that because there's still that stuff in the back of my mind that says, nope, you didn't do enough.
Yeah.
Nope, you didn't do enough. And that's pride. That's, being a little too worried about other people, thinking that's comparing yourself to other people. And, God has only called us to be faithful. God has only called us to do what he's called us to do. And that is enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It's, we all of us struggle with giving too much concern to what other people think or what other people approve of or what gets applause from other people. But we really are in the best place when we're thinking about, well, I'm mostly accountable to God, that I keep walking down the road he gave me to walk, and was I faithful in it, and trust him for the outcomes and all that. So cool. I love that your answer wasn't just a soundbite of 3 words. I love that it really is something all of us who are listening can relate to. It's a complicated answer because we're still figuring out what success is, and there's so many different ways that question could go. But I love that we got a little window into your heart of kind of learning and growing, and still ways to grow, along the way. I think that's cool. Thanks for being real, with your answer today. Appreciate that. Well, dude, thanks so much for being generous and sharing your story. I would agree with you that failure is too strong of a word, particularly if you're looking at Indiana and all those kind of things. I'm not sure what the right word is for that, but this is something God brought you through for what he's going to do next in your life. And as the Lord continues to use you as a shepherd in his kingdom, there are ways that you're going to love and lead and preach and take care of people. And there are ways that you're going to know God that have been formed through that difficult season. And so not at all a failure. It's from everything I know and understand, dude, you were faithful, throughout all of that, and held on until it was time to make the decision to close that down. But thanks so much for sharing all that. Your life has had some difficult chapters, but God's been faithful through it all. And thanks for sharing that today. Hey, where's the best place for people to connect with you on social media?
Yeah, you can connect with me on Instagram at Jonathan D. Crouch.
Okay.
So, Instagram.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for spending the day with us and getting to know Jonathan a little bit. I hope your heart's been encouraged. Again, if you're in a difficult season right now, man, keep holding on. See you soon. Yeah. Bye.
Thanks for spending time with us today. We hope you've been encouraged. If things are rough right now, hang on. Your story isn't over. To learn more, visit kyledunn.org.